Okay, good evening, brothers and sisters. Good evening, Bante, Luangpo, and all the venerables. We are very honored this evening to have the presence of Venerable Dr. Punaji. Just a brief introduction of Venerable Dr. Punaji. Venerable Dr. Punaji was first trained as a medical doctor, and then he decided to renounce and become a monk nearly 50 years ago. And since becoming a monk, he has traveled all over the world, has been in the United States and studied and obtained first a doctorate in Western philosophy and comparative religion, and then subsequently he obtained another doctorate degree in modern psychology. So the Venerable Doctor is a doctor 3 times over, medical doctor and 2 doctorate degrees. And since then, Venerable Doctor has also been appointed as Director of Education in the Fo Guang Shan University for overseas training of overseas visitors in Fo Guang Shan University in Kaohsiung. And since then, the Venerable has traveled all over the world teaching Dhamma and meditation. And the Venerable actually teaches the Buddha Dhamma in a very modern manner, and many of his translations are based on his own research. As a Pali scholar, he has researched deeply into the Pali text, the Pali Canyon, and translated many words. So you will find some of his translations will be a little unique, but they are very precise. And I have been following the Bante for a few years and actually seen how the precision of his translations actually explain very precisely a lot of the meaning that the Buddha was trying to expound, which modern translators using their own version of translations were not able to provide more accurate explanations. So Venerable Doctor has his own unique and very specific translations. I'm going to hand out the notes in a moment. For those of you who are in groups, I suggest that maybe you share one note so that you can make copies, because we did not expect so many. We only made about 20 copies. So I'll hand out the notes in a moment. Without further ado, I shall hand over to Luangpo.
Bante, just for your information, we have people here from Ipoh, we have from Teluk Intan, and Kuala Lumpur. So I will let Bante start the talk.
Well, I'm very happy to see you all and share my thoughts with you. When I read some of these books written by Venerable Dhamma Buddha Mahathera, I was very happy because I have been trying to understand the teachings of the Buddha from my young days. Maybe around the age of 11 or 12, my mother was a fairly religious person, and there were books in my home about the Dhamma, and also a book about the Paticca Samuppada, of course written in the Sinhalese language, which is my mother tongue. And they are in explaining the Paticca Samuppada, they have been using analogy, a story, comparing the Paticca Samuppada. I was studying science at that time. I was a science student. So I began to think there must be some connection with this Paticca Samuppada and scientific thinking. But at that time, I still couldn't understand fully these words used by the Buddha. I hope you are familiar with these words that describe the Paticca Samuppada. Here we have a paper where our friend Billy Thang has been very cleverly and effectively drawn this diagram. And in this diagram we have the Paticca Samuppada. The Paticca Samuppada is a set of words in the Pali language, the language that the Buddha is believed to have spoken. And these words are very important to understand the Paticca Samuppada. Today, unfortunately, these words come to us through English translations. You know, this was started by Rice Davids, who was really a Christian priest who became interested in Buddhism when he began to study other religions, because these Christian priests are educated in not only Western philosophy, Western psychology and things like that, but they also study comparative religion. And so by trying to study Buddhism, he became so impressed about the teachings of the Buddha that ultimately he became a Buddhist. And he began to translate the sutras because he saw something very important in the sutras, the message of the Buddha. But the Western language, like English, is not a language that is close to the language used by the Buddha in India. Pali, Sanskrit, these are the original languages in India, and these were not very similar to the languages in Europe. So there is a difficulty in understanding this language, and the other problem was that to understand the Pali language, they have to come and learn it from the Sinhalese or the Burmese or the Buddhist people who didn't know anything about English. So how can they communicate? So the only way was to take a translator, someone who had studied English, but simply studying English doesn't help much in understanding the Pali language. So, but with a lot of difficulty in understanding, one great thing that these people did was they took the time to read all these sutras, because the teachings of the Buddha were brought from generation to generation by chanting. They had to memorize the teachings, and it was brought by learning to chant. And in the chanting means just reciting like a poem, simply reciting prose, not poetry. And that is how it was brought, because there was no proper writing at that time. Although writing was there, but these sutras were mainly brought by reciting in the form of chants. So somehow they have been translating these things with great difficulty, but some of the words that they used to translate the Pali words, the English words used, sometimes the wrong words have been used. So the meaning conveyed by the words that they used didn't really bring out the message that the Buddha was talking about. Now, I, being a Sri Lankan person who has, my mother tongue was Sinhalese, and the Sinhalese language is very close to the Pali and the Sanskrit. So some of the words used in the Sinhalese language is almost the same as the Pali. So this way it becomes convenient for a Sri Lankan person who studies Pali to understand what is being said. So when I became so much interested in studying the teachings of the Buddha, I began to understand the difference between the translations given by the the English people and the meaning of the Pali words. And so I had an advantage that way in understanding. And the other problem was I was interested in the original teachings of the Buddha. But today, in the modern world, there are different kinds of Buddhism. We have Theravada Buddhism, we have Mahayana Buddhism, we have Vajrayana Buddhism, and these different kinds of Buddhism preach different things. So, when I began to study the history of Buddhism, I began to realize that the original pure teachings of the Buddha remained only for about 100 years after the passing away of the Buddha. It was about 100 years after the passing away of the Buddha that a schism or a split occurred between Theravada and Mahayana. From that time onwards, gradually the teaching became distorted. Because after 100 years, other ideas had got into the teachings of the Buddha in their interpretation. But the fortunate thing was, because the original teaching was brought by memory, not just ordinary memory, but by chanting the sutras, the teachings were memorized and chanted. But when people began to explain the meaning of those things, it got distorted. So, then the fortunate thing is that the sutras were brought, the teachings of the Buddha were brought by memory, but the interpretation of the sutras or the explanation of the sutras, that is where the difficulty was found. So I don't want to go into great detail about the different ways of interpreting the teachings of the Buddha. My main interest is to understand the original teaching in the proper way. So, when I read these books written by Venerable Dhamma Buddha, I found that he has done a very great effort to get all the sutras, read the sutras, and he has tried to explain, and he has understood that the original teaching is very different from the modern schools of Buddhism. So he has completely rejected the different kinds of Buddhism available today, and he has begun to study the original teaching. Now, I have been teaching the original teachings in my way, and we have our help from our friend Billy Tang and some others also, who helped me to start a website. And we call our website Proto-Buddhism. Proto-Buddhism is a word that I coined to point out that what we are talking about is the prototype of Buddhism. That means the original teachings of the Buddha from which the modern schools of Buddhism have arisen. So this is why I call it Proto-Buddhism. And this original teaching is what our Venerable Dhamma Buddha is trying to bring out. Now, when I read his Samatha and Vipassana book, I was very happy to see that he has drawn attention to all the important sutras. And when I read this other one, the Paticca Samuppada, the conditioned arising of suffering, that is the title of that book. And there also you get all the sutras mentioned which bring out the meaning. But unfortunately, he has not been able to throw away the English translation, because so what I thought was to show my interpretation of this Paticca Samuppada so that new ideas will come in. I don't ask you to believe what I say. You have to use your own intelligence and try to understand the meaning that comes out from what I am saying. Because now this Paticca Samuppada begins with these Pali words, Avijja Paccha Sankhara, Sankhara Paccha Vijnanam, Vijnana Paccha Namarupam, Namarupa Paccha Salayatanam, Salayatana Paccha Passo, Passa Paccha Vedana, Vedana Paccha Tanha, Tanha Paccha Upadana, Upadana Paccha Bhav, Bhav Paccha Jati, Jati Paccha Jara Maranam. Now, these words may be very strange to you, but if you begin to understand the meaning of it, you will begin to understand this. This word that I expressed like Paccha. Paccha is a word like precedes. But there is another word that is used in modern Western philosophy, that is antecedent. The word antecedent means something that comes before, precedes precedence is also the same thing, it comes before. That means something comes before another thing. Antecedent. So, what we are talking about is what is called a series of antecedents. Now, when we use these words like that, you begin to understand, because these are English words, and because you are familiar with English, but these are special words used in philosophy. So this is a series of antecedents, means now if now here we can speak of a row of people sitting. One person comes before the other person, and it's a row like that. A row, we can also have a row of pillars. We have a row of pillars, one pillar comes before the other pillar. That is a series of antecedents. Series of antecedents, one coming before the other. But that kind of series is called spatial antecedents. That is, the series coming in space. A row of pillars is a row coming in space. But there is another kind of antecedent, one coming after the other. Now if I tap this, you see beats coming one after the other. You hear sounds coming one after the other. That is called a series of temporal antecedents. Temporal antecedents, that is a series coming in time. So we have spatial antecedents and we have temporal antecedents. But we can have another kind of antecedent. We say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1 comes before 2, 2 comes before 3, 3 comes before 4, 4 comes before 5, 5 comes before 6. Now that kind of antecedent is called logical antecedents. Now this series of antecedents has been called paticca samuppada. Now paticca means prati-itya, one coming before the other. That means it is a series of antecedents. Samuppada means it happens at the same time. We have this word simultaneous, occurring at the same time. So, if it is a series of antecedents, one coming after the other, how can it happen at the same time? That question arises. But the question here is that these are what are called logical antecedents. One coming after the other logically, but not temporally. It is not happening in time, one coming after the other. It is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which are not spatial antecedents, they are not temporal antecedents, they are logical antecedents. So here the Buddha is speaking about a series of antecedents that occur at the same time. This is very important to understand that. Now what this means is, how the Buddha begins to explain this by using a method of explaining. Chakkuncha paticca rupecha uppajjati chakku viññāna. That means, when the eye is there, you begin to see an image. When you open your eyes, you begin to see an image. Now, what comes first? Opening the eye or seeing the image? If you don't open your eyes, you won't see the image. But the moment you open your eyes, you see the image. You see, that is something that happens at the same time. And when you open the eyes and see the image, chakkuncha paticca rupecha uppajjati chakku viññāna. Chakku viññāna means eye perception. When the eye is there and the image is there, that is called eye perception or seeing. Eye perception, or we call it seeing. Which comes first? The eye opening, the image coming, or seeing? All come together. So three things coming together. And when the three things come together, it is called Tinnan Sangati Passo. Passa is again today translated wrongly, but the word passa is what is called cognition. Today in the scientific word for this perception there is cognition. So in other words, when the eye is there and the image is there, there is eye perception or seeing, and with that comes cognition. In cognition you become aware of the world, the objects, the objective world that you are aware of. Then with the cognition comes Passapacchya Vedana. Vedana means a sensation comes up, a feeling. When the feeling comes up, Which one comes first? All three come together. So, then he says, Yang vedeti tang sanjanati. When the feeling comes, there is the sensation. There again you find the sensation is also coming up at the same time. Yang vedeti tang sanjanati, yang sanjanati tang vitakketi. There vitakka means a conception. That means with the perception comes a conception. Now, perception means, now when I look at this, I see something here. That is perception. But if I say this is a paper, that is a conception. So with the perception, which is the activity of the senses, comes conception, which is I begin to recognize what I see, and I am able to identify what I see as such and such. That is the conception. So when the conception comes, another thing happens. Yang vedeti tang sanjanati tang sanjanati tang vitakketi. Yang vitakketi tang papancheti. Now this word papancha is another word that is sometimes missed by the translators very much. They have got confused by the word papancha. Papancha really means recognizes. Once you have conceived, you have recognized. Now when I say this is a paper, that is the concept, but with the conception I have recognized that this is a paper. Now that also happens at the same time. You see, this is the kind of way this whole process goes on at the same time. This series of antecedents, they are not things that happen in time. So there is no past, present and future for this series of antecedents. It happens at the same time. That is why it is called paticca samuppada. Samuppada means it happens at the same time. Now this is something that our Venerable Dhamma Buddha has begun to realize, that this is not a thing that goes on from past to present and present to future. Because according to the modern traditional explanation of the Theravada tradition, they try to explain by making it temporal antecedent. But here he points out that it is not a temporal antecedent. It all happens at the same time. That is something great that I appreciate. But the problem is that these words, this is an explanation of how we become aware of the world that we are aware of. You see, in the Christian Bible, there is a section called Genesis. You are aware of that, huh? What does Genesis mean? Genesis means how the world came into being. But their genesis is that the world came into being because God created it. God said, "Let there be light," and light came up, and so on. You see, that is the genesis according to Christianity. But here the Buddha is talking about Genesis, but in a different way. You see, according to that Christian way of thinking, the world was created first, then the human being was created, and the human being saw the world. So the world was created first. But here, what the Buddha is trying to point out is, nothing came up first. It is simply that whole world is mind-made. By opening your eyes, you created the whole world. When we open our eyes, we begin to see something. There are two things happening here. One is seeing, which is an action. The other is what you see. So there is this process of seeing, and there is what you see. What you see is what we call the object. And the process of seeing is the subject. So there is the subject and the object. Normally people think the subject comes first and the object comes first, and these two things come and meet, and then you see. You see, you can say, I come here and I see this, what we call the Gautama Vihara. I come here and I see Venerable Dhamma Buddha. So I was there first, he was there, and then we meet and we see each other. But what the Buddha is pointing out is, that is not what is happening. First comes the seeing, and it is in the seeing that we have created the subject and the object. first comes the seeing, and it is in the seeing that we created the subject as well as the object. So that is the important point here. So when we are able to see that properly, both the subject and the object are creations of the process of perception. So how the subject and the object are created by the process of perception is what this chain of events talk about. How did the Buddha come to think about this? This is when this prince, the person called Prince Siddhartha, was born. And when he grew up, he began to see an old person, a sick person, and a dead person. When he saw these three things, he began to see the realities of life. What is this reality of life? That what we call life is not a static existence. What we call life is a dynamic process of change. Normally we think when a child is born, that child continues to live. But that is not what is going on. The moment the child is born, every atom, every molecule, every cell is changing, is destroyed. It is something new that comes up every second. The difference is seen only when the child grows up, becomes an adult, and then gets married. But that man and woman who gets married is not the child that is born. And when these two people grow up and become old and they die, it is not the same married, the man or woman who got married. It's a different person. You see, the body is something that changes, or at least it changes immediately, but the change is seen only after a long time. But the mind is changing every second. It's a new thought. So in other words, what we call life is a dynamic process not a static entity. But when we talk about things called existence, existence is a static concept in a dynamic reality. If existence is a static concept, then do we really exist? If it is a changing process, there is no existence. Now the modern scientists are gradually beginning to realize this. They have been talking about two things called matter and energy. Now, with the coming of this thing called quantum mechanics, they are beginning to realize that there is no such thing as matter. What is called matter is energy. And what is energy? Energy is an activity. When we speak of matter, we are talking about something static that is existing. There is no real existence here. But both existence and activity are only human concepts. It is all made up in our mind. It is just a concept. So the whole world that we are aware of is built by this process called conception. But when we talk about conception, we begin to talk about a thing called mind. Is there a thing called mind? You see, when we speak about the mind, there are two things. There is a thinking mind and an emotional mind. So, this thing called mind is a process of conception. And this is what the Buddha divided, analyzed, and pointed out. Today it is translated as aggregates, the 5 aggregates. What are aggregates? Aggregate simply means a totality. You put together something. This is not just an ordinary totality. It is an analysis of the process of perception. The Buddha is analyzing the process of perception. So that is why I don't call this aggregate. I call it the constituents of the process of perception. The constituents of the process of perception. Now the Buddha says, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana. Is it, we have to stop at this time?
Really, but maybe invite questions. Interesting.
Well, it looks like we have taken 1 hour to talk about this. And so I cannot get into the time limit is not sufficient, but instead of getting into this analysis of the constituents of the process of perception, we can allow you to ask questions if you have any problems in understanding this.
Bhante, we still have tomorrow evening, so you can continue tomorrow evening on explaining the Paticca Samuppada. Tomorrow evening.
Tomorrow evening.
Yeah, we can continue the explanation tomorrow evening.
Yeah, okay.
So, for now, based on what Bhante has explained, perhaps some of you may have questions. Please feel free to ask questions. And since we are recording this session, we would appreciate if you could use the microphone. Anyone needs to ask a question, just raise your hand. I'll pass the microphone to you.
Auntie, I have one question here. You translate avijja as unconsciousness. Is unconsciousness, does it mean not knowing, not conscious of something? Avijja.
Avijja, yeah. The word avijja, I have really translated as, normally it is translated by the English translations as ignorance. But I have translated this as unconsciousness. Avijja is not ignorance. Avijja is unconsciousness. Because this whole process starts from a state of unconsciousness. You're first unconscious and then you begin to become conscious. And this whole process of perception is the way we become conscious. We become conscious by going through the process of perception. So we start with a state of unconsciousness. Now this is because the Buddha did a great thing that we can't normally do. In his meditation, what he really did was, he stopped the mind. So what he really found was, the mind is an activity. There are no two things called mind and body. These are not two things. What we call the mind is an activity of the body. There are many activities going on in the body. We all know that there is an activity called breathing. We are breathing from the time we are born till the time we die, we are breathing. That is an activity that is going on in the body. And we also know the heart beating. That is also an activity that is going on in the body. And then we also know that when we eat, when we put food into the stomach, it gets digested. And ultimately it is also thrown out. So all that we know, those are activities going on in the body. So in the same way, seeing is an activity, hearing is an activity, smelling is an activity, tasting is an activity. These are activities that we refer to as mind. There are three activities that the Buddha spoke of. That perception, which is seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. And then the other one is the thinking part. That is also an activity that is going on in the body. The thinking is done in the brain. It is an activity of the brain. And then what is called the emotion is an activity that is going on in the body. When you talk about emotion, whether it is coming in the form of anger or fear or desire, all these are activities going on in the body. You see, these activities can be stopped. If it is an activity has a beginning and an end. And an activity, just as breathing can be stopped, when we want to stop breathing, we can stop it. So in the same way, even the thinking can be stopped. Even the emotional excitements can be stopped. And this is what the Buddha did when he began the meditation. He stopped that. And he came to a point where when that activity stops, it is like a dead body. The body becomes like a dead body. But it is not a real dead body, because a dead body, there is no... Now in modern scientific thinking they call it, there is what is called metabolism. And they speak of a thing called the basal metabolic state. That is the living part of the activity. That metabolism must be working if the body is not dead. And at the same time, there is temperature in the body. So the difference between the person who has stopped the mind and the person who is dead is that those two activities are still present in the person who has reached that state of stopping the mind. That is called Sanya Vedayita Nirodha. Now when that stopping of the mind occurs, you are completely unconscious. But what the Buddha did was that unconscious state didn't continue forever. He came up out of it again. And as he came out, he began to see how the mind is working, how the mind is creating the world. And not only the world, how the mind is creating the self. So the self and the world are created by this mental process. And it is by creating the self that all suffering comes into being. That is what he pointed out. And it is possible to stop this whole process, and especially stopping the emotional part stops the idea of self altogether. All selfishness is based on the emotional part. And when the mind is free of emotions, then all suffering comes to an end. So that is what we call awakening from the dream of existence. And that is what the Buddha achieved, and this is what all his disciples who reached perfection achieved. So that is just a very short way of explaining avijja.
Do you all have any questions? I think you all can ask anything.
Thank you. Bhante, just now you mentioned these dwellings in your dependent origination. So does this, connote that this is the sort of determinism, that when this happens, the other thing happens? And then you also mentioned quantum mechanics. But in quantum mechanics, there seems to be these elements of chance and probability. So how do you reconcile determinism and this quantum mechanics?
Can you please repeat your question?
Firstly, these 12 links, right? So would you say that there is this determinism underlying it? Right, that's the first part. Then just now you mentioned quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics seems to have with it this element of chance or probability. Things happening governed by a system of probability laws. So how do you reconcile these two things, determinism and quantum mechanics?
I didn't understand that.
Your explanation of Paticca Samuppada is basically determinism, is it?
Not, yeah. Determinism is slightly different.
Because you see everything
connected.
Yeah, you said everything happens irrespective of time, yeah? It all happens together. So it's like determinism. But how do you reconcile that with quantum physics?
Yeah, determinism. Why did you use the word determinism?
Yes.
Determinism is a word that is being used in modern science. Determinism means that everything that happens in the world happens only due to the presence of the necessary conditions. When the conditions are there, it comes into being. When the conditions are absent, it ceases to be. And that is how the Buddha explained the Paticca Samuppada. Hetung paticca sambhutang hetu bhanga nirujjati. So the Paticca Samuppada can be called determinism. But there is a slight difference. The slight difference is Sigmund Freud spoke of a thing called psychic determinism. Psychic determinism means that the mind of the human being also works in the same way, that the working of the mind is also dependent on conditions. And so the real Paticcasamuppada that the Buddha is talking about is psychic determinism. Now, even modern science is supposed to be based on determinism. That means every invention, every thing that has been created by the modern science, all that is based on the idea that everything happens dependent on conditions. But that is not psychic determinism. Here the Buddha is pointing out that everything that happens in the mind is doing the creation of everything. That is psychic determinism.
It contradicts the quantum physics. He says it contradicts quantum physics.
Yeah. Quantum physics is mainly not psychic.
Maybe you can explain.
Huh?
Can explain?
Yeah. Oh, he's talking about quantum physics. Yeah, the quantum physics is not really psychic determinism. Quantum physics has to do with ordinary determinism like electricity, magnetism, and atoms and molecules and things like that. So, but psychic determinism is mainly in terms of how the mind becomes conscious of a world and how the mind works in various ways. That's the difference.
So Bhante, thank you very much for the explanation of regard to the determinism as applied to the psychic aspect, right? Now come back to the quantum mechanics. And Bhante says that if this applies to the phenomena outside of the mind, there's a statement that Einstein made. He said that God does not play dice with the universe, which smacks of determinism. But when quantum mechanics came, there is this thing of probability, that things, phenomena that can happen, may be governed by probability. So, as far as the outside world is concerned, outside our mind, so would you say that both determinism as well as the elements of chance operate?
I did check that.
You say quantum physics. Quantum physics talks about probability.
Yeah.
So it's chance. So probability is chance of something happening.
Yeah.
It contradicts the determinism.
Well, there are problems coming up with quantum physics, but this psychic determinism is slightly different from the thinking in quantum physics. So, but here there are no probabilities in this. We are mainly talking about how consciousness comes into being, and it's directly observing the process by which we become conscious of a world and become conscious of a self. Yeah.
Thank you, Bante, for that clarification and sadhu. So thank you very much.
Hello. Good evening, Bante. Sadhu for the talk for tonight. Bante, I want you to draw the memory back to the book you wrote on Arya Magga Bhavana. Okay. So in that book, Bante has explained in the, what they call it, normally when we speak of the Noble Eightfold Path, we know of right will, right thought, right understanding, right speech. But Bante has coined the words in such a way. Bante has coined the word of using, instead of using right will or right understanding, Bante has used the word harmonious perspective, harmonious orientation. Can Bante elaborate a bit on that?
You want to know about the supernormal eightfold way? Is that what you're talking about?
Bante has used the word, coined the words harmonious perspective rather than
harmonious perspective, yeah.
Using the word right will or right thought or right understanding in sequence of the Noble Eightfold Path.
Yeah. The harmonious perspective deals with what are called normally called the Four Noble Truths. And only thing is, I call it four supernormal realities. But the important thing is, it talks about the insecurity of life and how the insecurity of life comes into being and how it ceases and the way leading to its cessation. So when you have understood that properly, it is really resolving a conflict. The conflict is that our emotions are coming in conflict with the reality that is perceived. That is the conflict. So it becomes harmonious because that conflict is resolved. Resolution of the conflict makes it a harmonious perspective. Did you understand that? Is that the question you asked, or did I answer something else, or huh?
Because Bante used the word, I just want to know, because rather than Bante use the word right understanding, normally we have the Noble Eightfold Path with right understanding, but Bante used the word harmonious. That's the question I was asked Bante.
No, the important thing is the understanding has to come first. And once you have understood, that the problem lies with the emotions. It is the emotion that is trying to change reality. Reality cannot be changed. It is the emotion that has to be changed. And the emotion has to calm down. Emotion is an excitement. And it is only by learning to calm the mind that the problem is solved. And once you have understood the problem, the next step is to begin to calm the mind. And calming the mind needs reorientation. That means turning in the opposite direction. It is like you are driving a car and you take a U-turn. You turn in the opposite direction. That turning in the opposite direction is the second step, which is called Samma Ditti and Samma Sankappa. Sankappa is turning in the opposite direction. And you make calmness the goal in life. And then you begin to act according to that, which is the harmonious speech, the harmonious action, and the harmonious lifestyle. That is how it goes. And from there on, we begin to calm the mind. That's how it goes.
Bhante, many Sri Lankan monks believe in the Abhidhamma. What do you think about the Abhidhamma?
Abhidharma. What is called Abhidharma is something that we have given up. I think Venerable Dhamma Buddha has given up Abhidharma. I have also given up Abhidharma. Abhidharma is really an effort to interpret the original teachings of the Buddha, and there are mistakes in that interpretation. But they called it Abhidharma because there was this conflict between the Theravadins and the Mahayana people. That conflict is really because you see, you have to understand that in order to understand the problem, that after about 100 years after the disappearance of the Buddha, a lot of people became Buddhist monks because the Buddhist monks were treated well by the public. So to get the benefits, people became monks, but they were not interested in practicing the Vinaya rules. Vinaya rules are the rules of the monk. They didn't want to practice the rules. And they started saying, let us change the Vinaya rules to make it easy. And the senior monks said, no, we cannot change the Vinaya rules which were laid down by the Buddha, and they refused. So these other monks who wanted to change the Vinaya rules, they said, in that case, we take a vote. So they took the vote. Who won? People who wanted to change the Vinaya rules won. That is what happened. And so the senior monks said, well, if you want to change the Vinaya rules, you can do it because you have won, but we separate from you. And then they were saying that There is a sutra where the Buddha says, in future, my followers will begin to not follow my higher teachings. They will follow only my lower teachings. The higher teachings like sunyata, they will not follow. When the senior monks said this, there was a leader among these monks who wanted to change the Vinaya rules. He said, don't worry, we will answer the public. And they convened a public meeting where all the lay followers came, and they said that monk, he was a fairly intelligent man, and he said, why do these senior monks want to follow the Vinaya rules? The only reason is they want to become arhat. This is why they want to follow the Vinaya rules. We don't want to become arhats. And ask, then what do you want to do? We want to become Buddhas. They said, we want to become Buddhas. And to become Buddhas, you don't have to follow the Vinaya rules. You have to follow only the paramitas. And they said, we are going to follow the paramitas and we are going to become Buddhas. But the lay followers didn't know that if these people can't follow the Vinaya rules, how can they follow the paramitas, which are even more difficult? They didn't realize that. They said, oh, these people want to become Buddhas. That is better than becoming arhats. So let us support them. So that is how Mahayana started. That is Mahayana, trying to become the Buddha. And but they didn't really follow the paramitas because that is not an easy job. And but they continued to break the Vinaya rules, and they adapted their own rules. And now the Mahayanists have started saying that when you become a Mahayana, you have to take a vow. What is the vow? Till all people in the world have entered Nirvana, we will not enter Nirvana. What does that mean? If that is going to happen, no one will enter Nirvana. You see, they have automatically given up Nirvana. That is what automatically happened. So, this way they started changing the teachings and the sutras and all those things. They started creating new sutras, and that is how it went on. So, Theravadins preserved the original sutras, and then what they did was, the Mahayanis started saying, we are talking only about sunyata, that is the higher teaching. The Theravadins are talking about the lower teachings, they started saying. But they couldn't really explain the meaning of sunyata. And the Theravadis began to say, no, we are not teaching the lower teachings. We are going to talk about the higher teachings. And higher teachings means Abhidharma. So the word Abhidharma really meant higher teaching. So that is how the word Abhidharma came into being. Before that, there was no such thing as Abhidharma. So from there on, gradually, the teaching started deteriorating. Gradually, it became, they started mainly talking about karma and rebirth. They stopped talking about what are called the Four Noble Truths. There in one of the sutras, the Buddha points out, if a person begins to think in terms of past, present and future lives, did I exist in the past? Will I exist in the future? Am I existing now? If you begin to think like that, your belief in self will become confirmed. And as a result, you will not be able to enter nirvana. There in the Sabbasava Sutra begins with that statement. And then the Buddha says, when a person begins to think in terms of suffering, cause of suffering, end of suffering, and the way leading to the end of suffering, such a person will get the idea of self to disappear, and we become a sotapanna, a stream entrant. So in other words, just talking about karma and rebirth misleads people. But today, the main belief has become karma and rebirth. People think that if you don't believe in karma and rebirth, you are not a Buddhist. But that is all nonsense, according to the teaching of the Buddha. There, even in the Kalama Sutra, the Buddha points out that a person who understands the teaching of the Buddha properly and begins to practice it doesn't have to worry about karma and rebirth. That is completely explained. Not only Kalama, there are other sutras where the Buddha says the same thing. So the important thing is to understand the Four Noble Truths. So this.
By the way, Bhante, I took the Bodhisattva precepts also, but I gave that up also. Any other questions?
Bhante, could Bhante please explain the term perception used for vijnana in the dependent origination, and perception, this term perception is also used for for sanya in the five aggregate. So the perception here and the perception there, are they the same thing? If there's a difference, could Pandey please explain the difference?
Before that, if you look at the process of perception, sanya, the translation is sensation. He's trying to find out what's the difference between vijnana and sanya. And sanya, the difference.
Oh yes, sanya and vijnana. Sanya is just the basis.
Please explain to him.
Hello? Your problem is about vijnana and sanya. Sanya is the basic thing that happens when you open your eyes and you see something. The first thing that we see when we open our eyes, what is it that we see? Most people think that we see objects. We don't see objects. What we see is light. Because when we see, light falls into the retina of the eye. And light comes in the form of waves. And when it falls into the retina begins to see light. That means we see only light when we open our eyes. That is the sanya. Now, out of the light, we put together light and create an image. So just as a painter painting a picture puts only colors into the paper or the background, and when we look at that picture, we are the people who create the image. The painter only puts colors. So, in the same way, when we look, what we just see is the color, and seeing the picture is the vijnana. Seeing the color is the sanya. Seeing the picture is the vijnana.
Brother Hall.
Bante, actually this Patija Samuppada, Patija Samuppada is translated as dependent origination, what I understand lah. So avijja is usually translated as ignorance. But actually, because of ignorance, finally you come rebirth round and round and round again due to ignorance. That's what most of us understand that, right? As we start from the beginning as ignorance or avijja. Then finally, because of the highest one is the jara marana and all death and what they call and rebirth. So now, as a lay Buddhist, I'm talking as a lay Buddhist. It's quite complicated. It's panicca samuppada, dependent origination. It becomes a wheel, right? Because of ignorance, we have sankhara. Because of sankhara, we have vijnana and namarupa, and all comes back to birth again and rebirth. Because of ignorance. Okay? So the question here is, do we let our practicing Buddhists I'm talking from the lay Buddhists, to make it so complicated for them to understand this, the panicca samuppada, in order for us to get enlightenment or the practice of the Dhamma. For example, we practice Dhamma, we used to have Sila, Samadhi, Panya, and then the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. We must really understand these aspects in Buddhism. But panicca samuppada, not many people can really understand. So how is it a must? Is it how important it is for Bhante tonight to give us this talk? But it's very good. But many people also get a bit confused, right? The Genesis and so on, in Buddhist Genesis. Is it really important that we must understand this aspect in Buddhism in order for us to practice and attain liberation of our mind? Sadhu.
Bhante has given me permission to answer for him. Firstly, I suggest you read my book, Condition Arising of Suffering. That will help you to understand a bit. The other thing is your question. If you look into my book, the Buddha says in Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta 28, he who sees condition arising or dependent origination sees the Dhamma. He who sees the Dhamma sees condition arising. So this means that if you understand the Dhamma, you must understand dependent origination. And if you don't understand dependent origination, it means you don't see the Dhamma. Right? So it is very important. Unless you understand dependent origination, you don't understand the Dhamma according to the sutta. And you cannot become a stream enterer. That's why it's very important to study the suttas, to listen to the suttas again and again until you understand. You have the opportunity, and the Buddha says it's very rare to come across the true Dhamma. In the suttas, the Buddha said he spent the whole night probably looking into the past. He looked until he saw 91 world cycles in the past, and he saw only 6 Sammasambuddhas during the 91 world cycles who were willing to teach, which means that 99.99% of Buddhas are Pacceka Buddhas. Very, very few are Sammasambuddha. So it's very hard to come across the true teachings, the real teachings of a Buddha. Now we have the opportunity. If we don't take the opportunity to enter the stream, we will be in samsara for a very, very long time. And we have to go down to hell countless times. So I suggest, Brother Ho, you listen to the suttas more, then you'll understand. If you don't have, we'll give you a copy of the treasury of the Buddha's discourses, 5 Nikaya.
Yeah.
Bhante, do you agree if I say words cannot really explain or make us to realize true Buddhism? It's true practice. Even Buddha used words just as a guideline for us. Or any explanation.
What is his question?
Can I answer for you?
Yeah.
Although it is true that words alone is not enough, but if you understand the words, that is the first step to practicing. Because if you don't understand the words, you might be practicing the wrong thing. Yeah, like many people who call themselves Buddhists are not practicing the Buddha's Dhamma. They might be practicing some Sayadaw's Dhamma or some Achan's Dhamma or some Amdru's Dhamma, but it's not the Buddha's Dhamma. So that is why the Buddha spent how many years? 45 years preaching the Dhamma. Why did the Buddha take so much trouble to teach about 5,000 suttas in our Nikayas? Because that is important. It's so important that the Buddha calls his disciples Savakas. All his disciples, monk and nun and lay people, are all called Savakas, hearers, listeners of his words. If you don't listen to the Buddha's words, you are not his disciple. If you don't understand his Dhamma, you are not his disciple. Because one day you say you are a Buddhist, another day you might be something else.
Yes, I agree with all this, but what I meant is, what Buddha trying to explain using words are to his nearest to his ideal need. But just by reading, if we don't practice, we don't really understand. Or else those language experts just reading all over, after finishing reading the sutta, then they will all be enlightened already. Do you agree with me?
What is he trying to say?
But then as I mentioned just now, the first step is trying to understand the Buddha's words. If you don't understand the Buddha's words, your practice also no use.
I mean, this as the guideline, this is what Buddha teaching, we take it as the closest. That means we must walk accordingly, the closest. Because Buddha being an enlightened person, I'm sure he is trying his very best to teach us. So what he has taught us is the closest. That means by using other words or different words, there shouldn't be any argument over it. That's why I'm saying whether we use this word or the other word. But as long as we walk according to Buddha guideline, it is the nearest to our understanding. But it's not perfect. No words are perfect. That's what I'm saying. No words are perfect.
No, actually, the Buddha's words are perfect. Our words are not perfect. You see, some people think that by practicing yourself, you can get wisdom. Not true, because the Buddha's wisdom is so high, and if he did not reveal these words to us, words of wisdom, however hard you practice, you will never attain what the Buddha attained. That is why when there is no Buddha around to teach the Dhamma, you cannot find an Arya. You can find people like Hindu yogis in India, they practice until they get all the psychic powers. They can fly, they can go through the wall, everything. Are they an Arya? Not even Sotapanna. You cannot even find one who is a Sotapanna. But during the Buddha's time, people who never practice, they just listen to the Buddha's words, and the Buddha said they have entered the stream, Sotapanna. Which one is easier? Yes, it's coming to 9 o'clock, and some of you got to spend 1 hour to go back home. So I'd like to thank our Bhante Punaji here very much for all his wisdom, sharing with us his wisdom. I hope you all go back and contemplate on these words. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Come, we just invite the devas to rejoice with us. Hitavata cha'amehi Sambatang punya sampadang Sabbe deva Sabbe bhuta Sabbe sattva Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.